Welcome to this episode of the Ninth Grade Experience. We have three new guests on the show today, and these three people you may have seen in your classroom, maybe at the middle school, or poking around in a Zoom session or something like that. But these three people that we're going to talk to and learn from today are probably three of the busiest people that are in our school district right now. They're our technology integration specialists. So we'd like to welcome Mr. Peters, Mr. Scholl, and Mrs. Moser to our program today. Thanks a lot for joining us, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Hi there.
Yeah, thank you.
So this is the largest Zoom podcast recording we've done too. So we'll see how this goes, and hopefully it all works out. I know that we're dealing with Zoom and learning it all together here. But before we start, we do want to clarify that the three people that you're hearing from today are not the people that if you have a tech problem, these are not the people that will be answering those questions. So, if you're listening today hoping to find out what happens when something, there's a problem, that's not what these people do. These people are like the people that help us to integrate all the learning into what you're doing online. And they're going to give you some tips and strategies. We have a Schoology expert or several Schoology experts here. So if we have Schoology questions or things like that, we can get into that too. So just to clarify before we're up front. So our first question that we always ask every new guest, since this is the first time you've been on, is describe your ninth grade experience. And as we always tell the adults, you don't have to mention the year or the school that you went to. You can if you want, but you don't have to. And since we're talking to technology people today, we thought it would be fun to add in, what was the piece of technology or the newest technology that you had when you were in ninth grade, if you remember back that far? So whoever wants to jump in first can.
I can go first here. So it's Mr. Peters, if you're listening. I can't actually remember. I was trying to do the math in my head for the actual year. But what I do remember about ninth grade is I was the first class to actually go up to the high school. The 8th and the 9th graders went to the high school at the same time. It was really like a unique situation. And so I never had the whole where I went to actually, you know what? Let me backtrack on that for a second. My ninth grade was in a middle school. That's right. That's how long ago it was. My ninth grade, I was the last ninth grade class in my middle school. So when we went up as 10th graders, the ninth graders went with us. So it was like a really unique transitional period. And I can remember in my history class, we were still using transparencies and a slideshow that accompanied by a record player. Now, this was still in the 2000s, but as we know, technology changed quick. So projectors and even record players, cassette players were still being used. And this has to be like 2000, 2001. And that was like the extent of the technology. I do remember taking a business class and learning about Microsoft Word and a C++ class as well, Visual Basics and that kind of stuff. But in the general classroom, it was mainly transparencies. As far as the technology goes.
I'll piggyback off of Dylan. I'll just based off of his last question or an answer, I'll answer that one first. So what I remember most about technology in ninth grade, and again, mine was also in the 2000s, but overhead projectors, as Dylan mentioned, I'm a left-handed person. So when I would go, if anybody knows a left-handed person, chalkboards, dry erase, overheads are my worst enemy, because all I do is I write and I smear and erase everything that I just wrote. So it didn't take very long for, in math class and things like that, for the teacher not really ask me to come up and write on the overhead anymore, just because I would erase everything that they had. But so that was one piece that I vividly remember, as well as, I don't know if you had experience with this, but I remember sitting in class as a kid and the teacher would go out in the hallway, kind of looking around, then they come back in with this massive TV on a massive cart, and you knew it was like movie day. So that as well as clickers. If we remember clickers, now we have all these different forms of formative assessment. But I remember the teacher having a set of clickers where we could, answer a question by clicking almost like a little remote control, whether it was A, B, C, and D. And those are the kind of the ones that I remember in terms of big technology back when I was in high school. And my experience overall, I remember I went to a school in Lehigh Valley. It was a rather large school, similar to Emmaus. But I remember ninth grade not really having any type of, and the lights just went out. I don't remember having any type of full on experience, any kind of really orientation. It was more or less thrown to the wolves. You're a ninth grader, small fish in a big pond. So it's nice to see that there's some resources out there for East Penn and Emmaus kids to kind of help them get acclimated to their ninth grade experience.
And Mrs. Moser, how about you?
So I guess I'm going to go last because I'm snickering hearing them discuss where they were in ninth grade in the 2000s, because I'm considerably older than Mr. Scholl and Mr. Peters, and I attended ninth grade in 1985.
Wow, you're one of the first adults that has ever given the year, so congratulations for that.
Yes. Well, so in the 1985-86 school year, which would have been when I attended ninth grade, I went to school in Berks County, which is a neighboring county, and I went very different than Emmaus High School. I went to a very small school district. My entire high school, which was 9 through 12, we were actually had a junior/senior high school. And I think our entire school had 500 students, 9 through 12. So, my experience was a lot different. I was one of 130 kids in my class, in my ninth grade class. What I remember most vividly about ninth grade, which is not a lot because it was a long time ago, but what I remember is one of my ninth grade classes was typing class. It was typing. I had a whole semester of going to a lab that had some manual typewriters and some electric typewriters. If you got there early, you could pick a seat with the electric typewriter, and that was a good day. If not, you had to work on the manual, and you had to actually feed the paper in. And we did exercises for the entire period, A, S, D, F, J, K, L, semicolon, and we did all the typing exercises. And it's interesting when I think about that, because nowadays in tech, we often debate if students should have that kind of legitimate typing training. Whereas now, of course, I'm sure many of your ninth grade kids are like, what? Typing? Why do I need? I can type a whole paper with my thumbs on my phone, right?
Yeah, I was just going to say, that's kind of leading into where we were going to go next. But
Yep.
We have this great, we were talking about everyone in their ninth grade experience and the different levels of technology. Whereas here, we're dealing with what we've been dealing with since March. Your jobs have taken on a heightened level of responsibility and involvement and, troubleshooting and those kinds of things. So what have you seen in the last couple months from students and the things, what have they we always assume that this age group, we call them digital natives, which means that they're kind of grown up with the technology. But what have you guys noticed about ninth graders, or that middle school to ninth grade kind of age group of things that they're just not as good at on the computer that we thought that they were, but they're kind of showing that maybe they're not?
Well, ironically, can I answer this one first, guys?
Mm-hmm.
Ironically, I live with a ninth grader. My oldest son is in ninth grade this year. So I can tell you that from a personal level, he's working on a Chromebook. He's working remotely, and he clicks everything so fast, he doesn't read anything. So I would say that while they are digital natives, and he is often teaching me things like, Mom, did you know you could do this? And did you make a meme this way? And how about this? And just look over here on Instagram and, on TikTok and all that stuff. But when it comes to reading the directions of his Google Classroom assignments or his Schoology assignments, or it comes to following the teacher's directions, he's like, I don't know what to do. Okay, so we have to slow it down and actually read those things. But I do think because kids are digital natives, their brains don't necessarily work that way anymore.
Yeah.
And that's hard. That's really hard.
That's an interesting point, to kind of say about reading the directions and those kinds of things. We always have to encourage students to slow down, to actually read, to actually think that there are directions, and then to read them.
Right.
And kind of actually process what they need to do before they just jump in and click away. How about Mr. Peters or Mr. Scholl? Anything that you have noticed or kind of had your eyes open to in the last couple months to what students are struggling with in the technology area?
Well, I think first off, they're incredibly resourceful, and they can learn stuff that they want to learn on their own very easily. Great at the art of Googling. However, if I hear one thing that just middle school and high school students struggle with, it's checking and being on top of their email. When teachers are emailing different things, it's just that I know us four every morning, we probably wake up and one of the first things we probably do is check our email. For students, the responsibility of checking the email sometimes comes later on. And I think that's one skill that is a life skill. And it is something that they're going to be having to do probably for the rest of their life, you know? And so if I had to signal out one thing, and that's something that I've heard from various teachers as well. And part of that is because, you know, how when you share a Google Doc, you get an email, and sometimes we get inundated with tons of emails and notifications through just Google or Schoology. But when you get that personal email from the teacher about maybe a missed assignment or something that's upcoming, sometimes they may not see that. So it's attention to detail, that kind of small stuff.
Yeah, I can piggyback onto that one a little bit with the attention to detail. And it also touches a little bit what Mrs. Moser was saying. Not necessarily instruction, but I would say a big one that I've noticed is following all the proper steps. So, you know, we have a Zoom link up. If I'm a teacher, I have a simple Zoom link up. The kids think, oh, well, you know, it's just easy. I can, you know, click on it, or I can just type in the code and off we go. Unfortunately, with some of the way our devices are managed and the way things are set up for security purposes, we have to, you know, follow certain steps. Us, not only as students, but as teachers, we have to follow those same steps. So for a Zoom, you know, I found that some students struggle, not that they're doing it incorrectly. They know where to find the link. They know where to go. But it's a matter of, you know, not signing in with Google, or, you know, not knowing what the passcode is, and just simple things. And as Mrs. Moser mentioned, her son, you know, is clicking too much. We found that, you know, on Chromebooks, if they hit a key so many times, it turns on an accessibility function where it locks them on caps lock. So if a teacher has their passcode is all lowercase letters, you know, that becomes an issue. So just following some of those processes, or they know where to go, but they're not logging in with the correct account, or because they're at home, you know, they might be logged in as their parent or guardian who happen to be logged on last on the home computer. So they're having trouble getting on. So just that, as Mr. Peters said, and Mrs. Moser said too, not only the instructions, but just that attention to detail is they think they know how to do it, and they do. It's just sometimes they have to go through the proper channel or the proper series of steps to kind of get there.
The Chromebook thing you mentioned is interesting because there is no caps lock key on the Chromebook, and that's something that always throws me for a loop. So that there is a series of buttons you can hit that like makes it a caps lock. That's pretty, I don't know if students really know that. Not that we need them to know that, but that's kind of interesting that there is a way to do it. And that's kind of like one of those things that with Chromebooks and all the devices that kids have is like they know what they know, but there's so much more that they can explore and kind of make things easier or simpler for themselves that they really don't have that like knowledge base to like how to do those like quick shortcuts and those kinds of things. I was thinking while everyone was talking, like if I'm a student and I'm struggling with something, like could you give like a way, like, or a steps, or what should a kid do, you know, if they're kind of just struggling with something? Like, how would you recommend that they kind of try to solve their own issue first? I know, like, as adults, we always think, like, go to YouTube and look a video up, like, you know, fix your washing machine, go to YouTube, like, build a deck, go to YouTube. But, like, if I'm a ninth grade student, I'm sitting at home and things aren't working, and, like, I try to email, but the email's not, like, you know, people aren't automatically there responding, or I'm doing my work at 11 o'clock at night and nobody's there to help. Like, what should I do as a student if I'm struggling with something?
I think first and foremost, we have since March, our team and the Office of Technology has put together our Family Tech Resources site, which is continuing to grow. It's funny because Mr. Sustrico, you just mentioned that with the keyboard shortcuts. And in fact, earlier this week, we released a ton of keyboard shortcuts tutorials on our Family Tech Resources page for students to find those shortcuts, whether they want to switch from window to window really quickly, whether they want to put on caps locks, how to split your screen. All those kind of shortcuts are available on there, as well as troubleshooting. And there's tons of links that our district has put out for troubleshooting, whether it's tips or our new one-to-one service help desk for more hardware, software kind of issues. So I think first, if I'm a student, I would check the Family Tech Resources website, which is, I believe, a bookmark on their Chromebook automatically under the EHS folder. So that would be my first stop. And I'll let Mrs. Moser and Mr. Scholl speak to some other techniques and ideas.
Can I answer this one first, Mrs. Moser?
Yeah, go for it.
So the one that I think of is, you asked the question about what should students do. But I think also as teachers, since March, as you mentioned, we've all had to learn a ton of things on the fly and troubleshoot ourselves. So one of the things I do the most, because we're working remotely and working with teachers, is just try to think logically through a series of steps. So when a teacher or a student or parent comes to me with an issue, I need to think logically and in a series of steps. And, what scenarios could, so I'll go back to my example of, at the beginning of the year, there were kids who could not get on to Schoology. Well, some students went to, Schoology and just started to create an account, or they were signed in as their parents. So just thinking logically in terms of, okay, it's not working. Why is it not working? And that kind of is that soft skill that, that problem solving, I think, is going to, obviously lend themselves as they go to college or a trade or, right into the work environment. That problem solving of taking a step back, looking at what's going on, what the issue is, how can you solve it, and kind of going from there. So taking all the information you can get and just kind of trying to solve it. And we do that as teachers as well, just as students are, as we're learning through all this new stuff.
Yeah, I would say, in conjunction with that, I knew Mr. Peters was going to jump in with the family tech resources, because our team as a whole has done a lot of work to try to make resources more available for just that reason, Mr. Stechko. I know that my own ninth grader, the times he's awake are different than me, right? He's way more nocturnal than I am. So he's working at odd times. So going to that page first is really good. And then the other thing I find, in contrast to Mr. Scholl, who's logical sequential, I'm very abstract random. Okay. So for me, I'm thinking about a lot of different things at the same time. And so I am constantly asking questions of other people to try to sort that out in my own head. My teaching, all of us have been teachers, classroom teachers. I have been an elementary teacher. And, one of the things I always said to my 5th grade kids was, you ask 3 before me, try to solve your problem yourself. So that, and that goes back to soft skills. I think while kids are, 9th grade students are digital natives, I think asking questions of more than just yourself, asking questions of maybe other students, as a team, we ask questions of each other all the time. That's how we're able to produce the content that you see on those websites, because we're working together, asking all those questions. So I think asking others is checking the resources you have, asking other people in your zone if they're aware of it, or even reaching out on social media. So many kids are connected through social media. I know all of us follow people, to try to hear the latest and get up to date. And then the last thing I think is having the stamina to keep after it. And again, that's another soft skill that we talk about, but that's a really hard one right now, because so many students and adults are trying to solve so many problems consistently. I think we're all running out of stamina. So I think pacing yourself and thinking about those other supports is really is helpful.
And it's interesting. We talk, and so much of what you said is so spot on to what we usually talk to kids about in the classroom. And when we always talk about, if you have a problem with your own cell phone, what do you do with it? Nobody,
Right.
When they have a problem with their cell phone, they don't just leave their phone for 3 weeks and let it sit there, and nobody tries to figure it out. So we're trying to encourage kids to have those, same thoughts about their phone with their device for school, or the things that they're using for school. So it's kind of interesting. And, we've done a lot of work together, and all the tech things that we always talk about, it's never the tools, it's all the other things that go along with it. And I think one of the things that the 3 of you have consistently said so far during our talk here is that a lot of it isn't necessarily on the skills of learning a program per se, even though we will talk about Schoology in a couple minutes for some stuff there. But a lot of what you're talking about, all 3 of you, are these skills of asking questions, persevering, trying to figure things out, problem solving, all the things we talk about as a district. So I think it's good to reinforce that idea that, while we have all this new technology, we have Zoom, we have Schoology, we have all the different stuff, it does come down to the idea of can I sit and try this for 5 minutes before I get frustrated and throw the computer across the room? Don't do that, by the way, because that's not good. But you know what I mean? Like we're talking about, we have the 3 people in our district that have a lot of tech knowledge, and we haven't even talked about how to do a program, how to log on, all that stuff. It's been about all these different skills that are so critical to have that you need to kind of develop even before you get on the computer.
Yeah. Well,
Absolutely.
here's the thing, Mr. Suchko. I would say, having been in this role for a number of years, and I'm sure Mr. Scholl and Mr. Peters can attest to this, the only constant in our realm is change, right? So even when we feel like we get to master a certain tool, whether it's Google Classroom or it's Schoology or it's Zoom or it's Google Meet, it very quickly changes and the tools themselves change. So that's why those, I'll say, soft skills become so pivotal and such a cornerstone of being successful in a tech world, right? It's not necessarily the tool and your fluency with the individual tool. It's your ability to adapt and change and learn those new things and have the stamina to do it.
Yeah, and just to kind of reiterate that, and there's videos all over the internet that are popular that say, for an elementary student, it's like 70% of the jobs they're going to have aren't even created yet, and things like that. So having those soft skills to be able to do all of those things regardless of the program, because the programs they're using now, and I know Mr. Peters and Mrs. Moser can attest to this, that the tools we were using 5-6 years ago are, for the most part, irrelevant, and they're going to continue to change. So if you think about not only elementary students, but ninth grade, by the time that they graduate and get to college, the tools that they're using now may still be around, but there's going to be a lot newer ones that, may do more things. You're talking about phones before, TikTok wasn't around and Snapchat wasn't around probably 5-6 years ago. All these things that they're so engrossed in just have not been around. And so I can't imagine what, you always think like, well, what else can they come up with? And there's always going to be something new. But that's really what those skills translate to.
Yeah, and it's kind of funny, like if you would have said back when I was in ninth grade that I wanted to be a YouTuber, like I'm not even sure if YouTube existed then, but I think it did. You would have been laughed at. Or if you wanted to manage a social media account, those kind of things didn't exist even 10 years ago. So like as we've said, it's just changing so quickly, and being able to adapt and apply. That's the other big thing. These skills that we're learning, take like a Google Sheet, right? You're using Google Sheets to put in some formulas, and you're learning all about that. And next thing you know, you get to a job that has Excel or a very similar numbers if you're using Mac. You can apply those skills you're learning across the board. And that's the important thing is here. We're looking at overarching skills and the soft skills as well with technology, not necessarily mastering a particular program. As we've all thought we mastered Google Meet in the spring, we're now working on mastering Zoom, right? So like it changes so quick.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were going to end with asking like what, as a ninth grade student, like if you had a suggestion for them to kind of something to master or something to figure out by the end of your ninth grade year. And I was thinking before we started, like the technology piece or like something cool that they could use in their future. But it almost seems like the answer to the question has been stated now for the last couple minutes in a row. It's like developing that resiliency, developing the ability to change pretty much on the fly and those kinds of things as well too. So, I don't know if there is something you wanted to add in about just something that by the end of your ninth grade year, what should a student, like what kind of skills should a student have? Maybe you can add in some of the technology pieces too of like certain things that might be good to know, but like what kind of things by the end of the ninth grade year should a student who wants to be successful and, not just maybe in the technology world, but in classes in general, what should they kind of walk away at the end of this year with, like skills wise or resiliency wise, or what do you think?
Yeah, I have one, and, Mr. Peters, Mrs. Moser, feel free to jump in. One, I'll lead with the tech first because I'll talk about the soft skills, but one I think is very valuable, not only for ninth grade, but for any person or any student of any grade, just because I think it'll translate as they get older. We talk about, and I've heard both of them mention as well, we talk about, kids these days consuming media, whether it's social media, whether it's video, And you talked about building a deck. I've done several home projects, and I've gone to YouTube and been able to figure out how to tile and make furniture and things like that. So I think the ability to create some form of media, whether it's through, video editing. I remember when, video editing just has a lot of those skills in terms of time management, organization, what's their workflow? How can they be efficient? How can they stay organized? How can they troubleshoot and problem solve? Just a lot of those skills, I think, translate well to that media, video editing, even photography, things like that, that now, every company has social media for the most part. They have a team, even Kutztown now, I think it's a major or a minor has social media, as an option. So it's constantly growing, and I don't foresee media and consuming that to be any less. So I think that skill, as well as all those soft skills that go along with it, for me would be one that I think would translate well for a ninth grade or any high school student.
So I was thinking of one, Mr. Peters, if you want me to jump in next. I was thinking about communication through technology, right? Like, I think, figuring out how to communicate with teachers, with adults that you need to stay connected with is really crucial, and coming up with a workflow that works. I know somebody mentioned, Mr. Peters mentioned about how important it is to check your Gmail, which I know many students do not value email and Gmail, but the fact of the matter is there are a lot of people who still communicate that way. So figuring that out, and even how you can filter those notifications that are coming in from some of the other tools so that you don't miss the important email communications, and figuring out a workflow that works for you, whether you're pinning your Gmail up on your bookmarks bar in Chrome, you're getting in the habit of checking that every morning. Gmail has a feature now where you can add that particular email to a task, to your Google Keep tasks. So coming up with that workflow so you can be successful and you have some sort of structure to that.
Well, Mr. Scholl went create, Mrs. Moser went communicate. I guess I have to go collaborate, right? So we
didn't even plan that. That was really good.
That was good.
Yeah. But no, it's so true. And Mr. Scholl was talking about that video about the 70% not created. They also show what skills are going to be the most valued in the workforce in the next 5 years. And one of the big ones is not necessarily collaborate, but teamwork. We were all hired here at East Penn, and we all know the hiring process was they value teamwork. You want to be able to work with your team, whether that's your grade level, whether that's a department. For us, it's our little team here of 3. We have to be able to work together. And one of my favorite sayings is the smartest person in the room is the room. And you have to be able to work together and collaborate as a class. You have to be, if you're doing small group projects, you want to really listen to all the people in that group. And this is something that can apply not just to group work, but to everything. We were forced into this mode of learning where it's remote. And I think collaboration in breakout rooms and stuff like that is so valuable. We're so fortunate. If we go back to our 9th grade year and think about if this pandemic hit when our 9th grade year happened, what would we have done? It would have been an entire shutdown.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I know a lot of things, network, and we've had some Wi-Fi issues and that stuff, but those issues wouldn't have happened when I was in 9th grade. The learning wouldn't have happened. So when we try to always paint things in a positive light, some of these things that we're looking at and saying, oh man, I can't watch this video. My Wi-Fi is just spinning. Zoom's not working. I can't log into Schoology and so on. None of that would have even occurred in my 9th grade year because it would have just completely halted and there would have been no more learning for any of us in 9th grade, the 4 of us. It would all just stop.
So we'd like to take an opportunity to thank Mr. Peters, Mrs. Moser, and Mrs. Scholl here for a great discussion about technology and the overall picture of why it's important in our district and what's going on now. We're going to do a separate episode that will be available on a different feed. It'll be more focused on like questions about Zoom and Schoology and things that you're seeing in the Tech Tuesday, because we wanted to give you a separate piece for that too, in case people were kind of wondering like, where are all the strategies? Where's the tips? Why isn't my Schoology doing this? But I think this conversation was really great for students to hear, because so much of it didn't even focus on a device. We didn't talk about like your Chromebook. We didn't talk about iPads. We talked about things that you can control even without Wi-Fi. You can control a lot of the things that we talked about today. So this is part 1, and we'll hopefully you want to tune into part 2. So there'll be a video and the audio for part 2 as well too. So thanks a lot for joining us, and we'll hear from you shortly. So thanks a lot, everybody.
Thanks.